Hello and welcome to what is a very delayed update on my Warbringer Nemesis Titan build and paint video. So if you've seen the previous videos in the series, see obviously I did an initial unboxing and then an overview of the first stages of the build. The project then stalled for a little bit, as in a break from hobby tradition I went back and finished a previous project and actually completed it. Now that project was my Warlord Titan, which I may well put a video up about that one as well, as it used quite a few of the same techniques as I will be using on the Warbringer, but it is now complete, so you can sort of see where things will be going. But I'm now back on the Warbringer, so hopefully have some slightly more regular updates as that build progresses. So, starting with the body, I've now got this as assembled as it's going to be before it's painted. This is the largest sub-assembly that I will be doing. So this will be fairly awkward to paint, though not quite as bad as the Warlord, but luckily quite a lot of it actually is hidden behind other pieces when it's all assembled, so there's not too much to actually paint. I think the biggest areas of detail around the back here with the doors. You could also see where I've added the magnets into the pre-drilled holes for the removable ammo hoppers, so they can be replaced if Forgeworld ever release additional weapons for the carapace. Certainly in Adeptus Titanicus there are now rules for the Bellicosa volcano cannon to go on top. I don't know if that would be the only one. I was hoping they might do a plasma weapon as well, just because I think that would look really good. So yeah, you can see here I've got one of the pins there. There will be one over the other side just to help keep the reactor pieces in place a little better. Also some holes drilled there for some sturdier pieces of brass rod, which is the 4mm brass rod that I use for pinning the larger sections. So you can see one of the shoulder pieces here does actually have some paint on, and the brass rod is glued into there, so that will just slot in like that and just make it nice and secure so the arms don't drop off. Also on this shoulder piece you can see there's a hole drilled there. That will be for another pin to go through to the underside here where the ball socket joint for the weapon arm fits. So I've got that initial hole drilled. Then once I've got the Titan further assembled, I'll work out what angle this arm piece is going to go in at, and then hold it in place and drill down through the hole there, just so I can get the pin into there. Just otherwise this has got the whole weight of the weapon just resting, pulling down on that there, so I think pin will be a good idea to hold it in place. I'm still undecided about what angle these are going to be placed at. There's a couple of options, and in the instructions and the model on the Forgeworld site they're just at this sort of angle at 90 degrees to the arm. On the Adeptus Titanicus version, if you assemble it based on the sort of pre-made tabs on it rather than cutting them off and repositioning it, then they have it at about 45 degrees. I mean, from the point of view of actually being able to rotate the weapon up and down, it seems like it should be more like that, but I think that then brings the arms in a bit too close to the body, so that's maybe not entirely practical, and you do still have a certain amount of vertical movement just from that ball socket there as well, so that's maybe not too much of a problem if you do want to make the weapons point downwards. Also, you can see this is the point where the air defence turrets will fit on the model, and again you can see that's got holes there. You can place a magnet in there, which I expect I'll be doing. Obviously these will stay in place by just gravity alone, but it probably makes more sense to get a magnet in there just to keep them a little bit more secure. Obviously you can see I've started to paint some of these sections. So in a minute I'll be talking about how I'm painting the model and what further painting I'll be doing on it. So moving on to some further pinning for the weapons. I'm definitely a firm believer in pinning. I think it's fairly quick and easy to do. As I said, I use 4mm brass rod for anything substantial and just a battery powered drill with a 4mm drill bit. You can just drill a hole that's slightly bigger than the pin, so you've just got a little bit of room for adjustment. So for instance, for the volcano cannon here, just put a single pin in there, and that will just keep that very secure, much stronger than just gluing it directly with no pinning. The other weapon I have is the Gatling blaster, and again gone for a very similar thing, just with slightly more, there are just slightly more sections involved in it. So I've drilled into the barrel itself, the pin will go in there, right through this section, and then into the main body like that. So I'll probably just be pinning this single barrel just to give it some strength, and then I'll rely on that one to support the other barrels because they are also attached at this end, so all the barrels are attached together. So I think just having the one pin is probably suitable. I'm also magnetizing the weapons, so I have drilled some holes there. These are for 10mm by 3mm magnets. So magnets like this, and that's actually the depth for 2 magnets. See if I put that in, so that's flush there. So I'm not going to be using 2 magnets on one side, but the reason for that is that where these attach to the arms, these are quite small pieces and it'd be difficult to drill suitable holes in for the magnets. So I'm hoping I'll just be able to have the magnets glued just flush to it like that. I'm hoping that will be strong enough, and then those will fit into the top half of the holes there to meet the magnets that we glued in to the bottom. So that will just allow me to take the weapons off for transportation, or if I decide to buy any of the other available weapons in the future, I'll be able to swap them over. I'll probably also put a couple of small magnets in where the pipes that power the weapons attach, just to give a bit more stability on those, keep them in place. But those will probably just be maybe a 5mm magnet. So yeah, that's largely what I'm planning pinning wise. If you've seen my other video, you'll have seen the pinning I've done on the legs. And one further bit of magnetisation that I thought I'd mention is on these air defence weapons that go on the top of the Titan. These also have pre-drilled magnet holes. You can just see them in the side there where the weapons attach, and they're also matching holes on the weapons themselves. So that's just let me put some magnets in there, so those clip into there quite nicely, and just hold it tight enough so you can rotate those, but it keeps them in place. So that's nice. I do like that Forgeworld have started doing these pre-drilled holes for magnets. It does make life a lot easier, and it gives you some clues of where you can apply magnets. So I think if you're going to be building one of these kits, it's worth stocking up on magnets and doing what you can with those. It does add a lot more versatility and makes it tight and easier to assemble as well. So moving on from the assembly, we'll now talk a bit about some of the painting and what I've done with that. So obviously there are quite a lot of large metal areas on the model. I've tried to avoid just having just a single shade on them, so I've got a technique for doing metal which I think gives quite good results. So basically what that is an initial base coat of 4 parts Vallejo gunmetal to 1 part Vallejo black. That's the Model Air paints. spray that all over. Then a mix of 1 part Nuln Oil, 1 part Agrax Earthshade and 1 part Laumian Medium, which I just put all over. Now you may know that washes don't work that well on large flat areas, so you do get some not particularly nice looking effects, but it does get some shading in there and darkens everything down a bit. So then once that's dried, I come back again with just pure Vallejo gunmetal and spray that on, but try to avoid getting too far into the recesses, so that gives a sort of slight variation of tone across the piece, where you've got the darker bits and the wash, but it also tidies up the slightly messy effects from the wash. I then do one final dry brush of Necron Compound, which is a very light dry brush, because again on large flat surfaces dry brushing doesn't work very well. You can get some nasty effects from that, so it's incredibly light, just to try and pick out the very edges of some of the details, so it just gives a very subtle sort of edge highlight and picks out a few of the details here and there. So that's how I do the sort of silver metal. Also, when pieces are absolutely complete, I will go over them with some oil paint. So that's a mix of black and brown oil paint. I really give the pieces a pretty thorough coating of that, and then wipe that back initially with a piece of kitchen towel to get the worst of it off, and then with a sponge, and work that back so it just leaves that in the recesses, so it gives a nice sort of dirt and grime look to it, adds a bit more to the shading, and I also find it just changes the tone of the metal and the texture ever so slightly, that just makes it look slightly more like actual metal. I'm not quite sure why that is, but it does seem to have an effect, so that's just an added bonus. I think that's just a quick way to finish off these larger pieces. Bit messy, but I think it does give good results. Obviously I'll be going back over this piece and picking out a lot of the details with some other colours. I normally have my main metal colour, then I'll have a brassy bronze colour that I pick out some details, and a very bright silver that I'll use for things such as these pipes here and pistons. Also on this sort of heatsink block here, I'll go over that with a couple of coats of Nuln Oil and Agrax Earthshade, because that will just dull it down, give it quite a dark metal look and a slightly more matte finish that just makes it look like a more chunky sort of metal that would be good for heat dispersion. So you can see on this piece here I've started to apply some of the other metallic colours. So there you can see the brass colour, that will just have one final highlight put on the edges, and just to pick out a bit of the detail on that. And then also the slightly lighter silver that I've used on these grills and some of this mechanical detail. This cog symbol in the centre I will probably paint in the black and white halves, like the standard Mechanicus colours, so I tend to just pick out those cog details in the black and white. It just adds a little bit of extra detail, it's just a bit more interesting. So this is the kind of finish that I'll be going for across the Titan. I think you can just about make out how the slight variation in tone by the wash and the airbrushing there, which I think adds quite a lot. And also you can see where the wash has just allowed a bit of shading to settle in the detail there. If you're wondering, this is a support piece for the main gun on the carapace. Now something where I've gone for a slightly different technique, it's the toes here. Now this one is just about finished. As you can see, I've gone for a much more corroded and aged look. I must admit I don't tend to do too much weathering on my Titans, but I do think certainly the toes benefit a lot. So again, this was painted initially the sort of gunmetal colour, then used some typhus corrosion on it, painted in the brass detail, added some of the verdigris effects with the Citadel paint for that, the Nihilec Oxide. I'm not sure that's how you pronounce it, but I'm sure you know the one I mean. You go back over that with the brass, and a final dry brush all over with a silver colour, so that's onto both the silver pieces and the brass pieces, which just add sort of final highlight to the brass and just ties it all together a bit. And I have just then added just a little bit of rust with some old rust weathering powder. I did try the Games Workshop Riser rust, but I just found that was maybe a little bit too bright. I prefer the slightly darker rust from the weathering powder. So yeah, so this is the one foot one toe that I've finished. I'll be doing the other 4 toes in obviously the same manner. Also, been working on the initial painting of the inside of the cockpit. So again, this is a similar technique as I used for the metal. So it's initially airbrushed a darkish colour, washed, and then airbrushed up with a couple of lighter colours just to leave some darker areas in the recess. And then there's a final very light dry brush of white scar just to pick out the very edges of the detail. You can see there, I think, how the airbrushing gives quite a good variation of tone and colour across the piece and adds quite a lot of shading. I'll then just be going back and obviously picking out all the details on this. At the moment I have put another magnet in where this piece attaches there, because this has the faceplate of the Titan on it. So I'm thinking by magnetising that I'll still be able to remove that piece to see the crew, otherwise they're very much tucked away down inside. But I haven't completely decided. I'll see how that stays together, or whether it leaves any nasty gaps when it's all put together, in which case I might need to glue it and fill it. Obviously once I've painted this interior I'll mask it off and then spray the exterior of this piece, although quite a lot of this is covered by the faceplate. And obviously I've left the crew out now for painting. And final piece I've been working on, well, I've been working on a number of the armour panels, and I've got all sorts of little pieces in various stages of painting, but this is one of the armour panels that I've been working on. This is obviously the faceplate. So at the moment this gold is unfinished. That's just got a base coat of Retributor armour at the moment. It's just applied as the famous 2 thin coats. Then I'll be going over that with some Agrax Earthshade gloss to pick out the details, add a bit of shading, and also run that around the edges where it meets the red pieces of the armour, just to add the shading in there. And then I'll be going back over that with some more Retributor armour, Liberator gold for some highlights, and some very final highlights in silver, just to pick out the sharpest edges and details. For this red section, that was done with Vallejo Model Air colours, so I start with a mahogany all over, and then a fire red airbrush trying to leave some shading in the recesses, and finally Ferrari red again as the second stage of highlighting, just so it's not all just one colour. I've then gone and painted a little bit of edge highlighting onto the edges of the grille there. I may add another stage of that just to lighten it up a bit, particularly around the bottom edges that are facing upwards. But but I'll be using this same sort of technique of for all the armour panels. I might do some in some slightly creamy colours as well, so it'll be mostly red with a few patches in a cream colour, which will match my Warlord Titan. And yes, the armour and all the other parts of the model will receive a varnish spray with a vinyl spray, so it's sort of not halfway between the matte and gloss finish, so it just adds a bit of gloss to the armour without going over the top, and also it's sort of appropriate for the metal, and I do that before I apply the oil paint that I mentioned earlier, so it just helps protect the model as well when the oil paint goes on. I don't actually put any further varnish on over the oil paint, I just leave that. So just got a final shot here of a few of the pieces together, so hopefully you can see where this is heading. As I said, I've got quite a lot of pieces at different stages of construction and painting, so I'm tending to paint in very small sub-assemblies and then I'll assemble as I go. Still got some pieces that need to be completely cleaned up. I tend to have those ready to go, and then if I have a few minutes, particularly if it's nice weather, just pop outside and spend some time in the garden, just filing and cutting off mould lines and things like that, because that's a very slow and laborious process, particularly on these larger models, because there is a lot to clean up. It does take quite a while, but breaking it up like that helps, and just gradually find yourself getting through it. Though I always seem to find one or two mould lines that I've missed once I get to paint the model, which is obviously annoying, but there you go. Okay, so I think that's brought you up to date. I hope you enjoy this. If you have any questions or there's anything more you'd like to see, then please let me know in the comments, and hopefully have another update for you in the near future. Thanks for watching.